I didn't plan to stop that day. The engine of my old car sputtered as I rolled past the familiar street, the one I hadn't visited in nearly 15 years. The world outside my windshield looked the same, yet completely different, the maple trees taller, the houses painted fresh, and the wind carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked earth and forgotten memories. I was only supposed to drive through. But as I slowed near that small blue house at the corner, the one with the white picket fence and the crooked mailbox still leaning to one side, my heart began to pound. I told myself it would be quick. Just a hello. Nothing more. But life, as it often does, had other plans. I parked across the street and sat there, staring at the front porch that had once been my second home. I could almost see her, Mrs. Whitmore, rocking gently on her old wooden chair, humming those soft, wordless tunes while her tea steamed beside her. She had been my neighbor, my childhood refuge, and, in many ways, the grandmother I never had. Back when I was a lonely 15-year-old boy escaping the noise of my parents' endless arguments, her porch had been my sanctuary. She'd listen without judgment, pour me lemonade, and tell me stories about hope, forgiveness, and patience, things I didn't fully understand back then. I hadn't seen her since the day I left for college. Life had taken me far, a career in another city, a marriage that ended quietly, and a pace that left little room for reflection. And yet, that morning, something inside urged me to take a different route. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. The gate creaked the same way it used to when I pushed it open. I hesitated before knocking, unsure if she'd even remember me. But before I could raise my hand, the door opened. And there she was. Mrs. Whitmore stood with a small cane in her right hand, her silver hair now thinner, her shoulders slightly bent. But her eyes, those warm, honey-colored eyes, still carried that same gentle glow. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. Then her lips curved into a trembling smile. "Evan," she whispered, as if the years between us had dissolved in an instant. I nodded, unable to speak. She reached out with her frail hand, touching my arm as tears welled in her eyes. "Oh, my dear boy, you came back." I managed a soft laugh. "I was just passing by," I said, my voice cracking. "Thought I'd say hello." Her hand tightened around mine, the corners of her mouth lifting with that old familiar warmth. "Why don't you stay a little longer?" The words hit me like a quiet miracle. I swallowed hard, nodding. "I'd like that." Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and old wood. The walls were filled with photographs, moments frozen in time, some faded with age. She poured me tea in the same porcelain cups we used years ago. We sat near the window where the sunlight pooled softly on the floor. She asked about my life, and I told her pieces of it, how I'd moved to the city, married, worked endlessly, and how that marriage ended without much of a fight. I confessed that I often felt like a stranger in my own life, chasing success but missing something I couldn't name. She listened without interrupting, her wrinkled fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. Then she told me about her life, how her husband had passed away a decade ago, how her children rarely visited, how most days were spent in quiet solitude. "The world moves too fast now," she said softly. "Sometimes I think people forget how to just sit and listen." We both smiled at that, a shared understanding of how life's noise often drowns out what truly matters. As the hours passed, we drifted from laughter to silence and back again. She showed me her garden out back, where wildflowers had claimed new territory, and a little wooden bench sat beneath a willow tree. "I still sit here every morning," she said. "Even when it rains. It reminds me to be grateful for another day." We walked slowly through the garden, her hand on my arm for balance. The air was crisp, the world peaceful in its stillness. I realized how long it had been since I felt this kind of quiet, not the emptiness of loneliness, but the fullness of presence. Before I left that afternoon, she pressed something into my hand, a small, folded letter, sealed with a faded ribbon. "For later," she said. "When you feel like you're losing your way." I promised I'd visit again soon. And for once, I meant it. Over the next few weeks, I began stopping by every Friday after work. It became a ritual. I looked forward to bringing her flowers or pastries from the bakery she loved. She'd always wait by the porch, cane in hand, smiling as if my visits filled her week with purpose. We talked about everything: old neighbors, her late husband, her favorite books, my uncertain plans for the future. Sometimes, we just sat in silence, watching the sunlight move across her living room floor. She had this remarkable way of making stillness feel alive. One evening, as I helped her set the table for dinner, she paused and said, "You know, Evan, when you first came to my porch all those years ago, I worried about you. You looked so lost. But look at you now, still kind, still searching, still trying. That's a good thing." I smiled, though my throat tightened. Still searching, yeah. Maybe that's who I am. She chuckled softly. We're all searching, dear. The trick is to keep your heart open while you do. Then, one Friday, she wasn't on the porch. The windows were closed, the curtains drawn. My chest tightened as I knocked on the door, calling her name. No answer. A neighbor, a woman in her 60s watering her plants next door, looked up and said gently, "She's been taken to the hospital. Heart trouble, I think. Just a few days ago." I don't remember much after that, just the rush of my heart as I drove across town to the hospital, the smell of antiseptic, the low hum of machines. I found her in a quiet room, resting, her hands pale against the white sheets. She looked smaller somehow, but when she saw me, her eyes lit up again. "You came," she whispered. "Of course," I said, sitting beside her. "You told me to stay a little longer, remember?" A faint laugh escaped her lips. "That's right." She took my hand weakly. "Promise me something, Evan. Don't let life make you hard. Keep showing up for people even when it's inconvenient. That's what keeps the world from falling apart." I promised her. And that night, after the nurses dimmed the lights, I sat there for hours, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. A week later, she was gone. Not at her small funeral, the sun was shining, the sky painfully clear. A few neighbors came, a handful of relatives. I stood by the willow tree in her garden, holding the letter she'd given me on that first day. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon. Inside, in her careful handwriting, were these words: "Dear Evan, if you're reading this, it means life has shifted again. Don't be sad. I've had a full, beautiful journey, one made brighter because you came back. You reminded me that kindness never expires, that no matter how much time passes, people still need people. Promise me you'll keep visiting others the way you visited me. There are so many lonely hearts out there waiting for someone to just say hello, and maybe stay a little longer." By the time I finished reading, the paper was wet with my tears. I looked around her garden, the flowers swaying gently in the wind, the bench where she once sat every morning, and I realized she had left me something far greater than memories. She had left me purpose. That evening, I started volunteering at a nearby care home. I began reading to the residents, listening to their stories, bringing them the same quiet attention Mrs. Whitmore once gave me. Each smile, each thank you, felt like a small echo of her voice saying, "Why don't you stay a little longer?" And somehow, through those visits, the loneliness that had once filled my own heart began to fade.